Who actually benefits the most from Bitcoin? At first glance, the question feels almost too obvious. The early adopters, right? The people who bought it when it was worth a few dollars. The ones who held through the chaos and walked away with life changing wealth. Or maybe it's the miners, the institutions, the hedge funds, the whales whose wallets are tracked obsessively on social media. That's usually where the conversation starts. And unfortunately, that's where it often ends. Because when we ask who benefits the most from Bitcoin, we instinctively translate the word benefit into a single metric: money, profit, net worth, charts that go up and to the right. We measure success in dollar terms because that's the only language the current financial system has taught us to speak fluently. But Bitcoin was never designed to answer a question as shallow as who gets rich. It was designed to solve a much deeper problem. And when you zoom out far enough, you start to realize that focusing only on price appreciation completely misses the point. Bitcoin is not just an asset, it's a system. And in every system, the people who benefit the most are not always the ones who extract the most value in the shortest amount of time. More often, they are the ones whose relationship with the system fundamentally changes the way they live, plan, and think. The irony is that many of the people who made the most money from Bitcoin don't actually understand what it is. They timed the market well, or they got lucky, or they had enough capital to absorb volatility. They benefited financially, yes. But financial benefit is only one layer, and arguably not the most important one. If you strip Bitcoin down to its core, what it really offers is not wealth, but optionality. It gives people an alternative, an exit, a parallel path that exists outside the rules of traditional money. And for some people, simply having that option is more valuable than any percentage gain. This is where the question becomes uncomfortable because it forces us to confront something we don't like to admit. Bitcoin does not benefit everyone equally. It never promised to. It doesn't redistribute wealth fairly, and it doesn't magically fix inequality. In fact, in purely numerical terms, it can look brutally unequal. But Bitcoin was never about equality of outcomes. It was about equality of access. Anyone, anywhere, with an internet connection can participate. No permission, no approval, no trusted intermediary deciding who is worthy and who is not. That alone represents a radical shift in how financial power is distributed. And yet, even that framing still doesn't fully answer the question, because access alone does not guarantee benefit. Two people can buy the same amount of Bitcoin at the same price, and one of them will benefit profoundly, while the other gains almost nothing beyond stress and confusion. The difference is not timing, it's not intelligence, and it's certainly not luck. The difference is perspective. Most people approach Bitcoin carrying the mental baggage of the old system. They see it as a faster horse, not a different road. They bring the same impatience, the same fear, the same short-term thinking that the fiat world has conditioned into them for decades. They ask how fast it will go up. They panic when it goes down. They anchor their sense of security to a number on a screen. In doing so, they never really leave the system. Bitcoin was designed to challenge. Bitcoin doesn't reward that mindset very well. In fact, it tends to punish it. So if the biggest beneficiaries aren't necessarily the richest holders, and they aren't always the loudest voices on social media, who are they? To answer that, we need to stop looking at Bitcoin as a speculative instrument and start looking at it as a tool that changes the balance of power between individuals and institutions, between time and money, between effort and reward. We also need to accept a counterintuitive idea. Sometimes the greatest benefit is not gaining something new, but losing something old. Losing dependency, losing fragility, losing the quiet anxiety that comes from knowing your savings can be diluted, frozen, or devalued without your consent. When you view Bitcoin through that lens, the conversation shifts dramatically. It's no longer about who bought first or who holds the most. It's about who needed an alternative the most and who was ready to understand what Bitcoin actually offers. And that brings us to an important realization. The people who benefit the most from Bitcoin are rarely the ones who talk about it in terms of price alone. They talk about it in terms of time, sovereignty, and control. They don't see Bitcoin as a ticket to luxury, but as a foundation for stability. They are not chasing upside. They are escaping downside. In the next part, we'll move away from the headlines and the charts and look at a group of people who almost never make it into the mainstream Bitcoin narrative. People who may never become rich from Bitcoin, but for whom Bitcoin quietly changes everything. Because sometimes the greatest beneficiaries are the ones who simply stop being squeezed. There is a certain kind of Bitcoin story that almost never goes viral. It doesn't involve overnight millionaires or dramatic screenshots of portfolio balances. There are no Lamborghinis, no victory tweets, no bold predictions about price targets. In fact, if you were only paying attention to mainstream crypto media, you might never realize these stories exist at all. And yet, for the people living them, Bitcoin is not an investment. It's relief. To understand who truly benefits from Bitcoin, you have to look beyond stable economies and functioning banking systems. You have to look at places where money doesn't quietly lose value at 2 or 3% a year, but collapses openly, violently, and without apology. In these environments, the question is not how to grow wealth. The question is how to keep it from disappearing. For millions of people around the world, saving money in the local currency is an act of slow self-destruction. Every paycheck loses purchasing power before it even reaches their hands. Inflation isn't an abstract economic concept. It's something they feel at the grocery store, at the gas station, in the shrinking portions and rising prices of everyday life. In these systems, working harder doesn't necessarily lead to getting ahead. It often just means running faster on a treadmill that never stops accelerating. Bitcoin enters this picture not as a promise of prosperity, but as a way to stop the bleeding. It doesn't make people rich. It doesn't solve all their problems, but it gives them something profoundly rare. A form of money that cannot be quietly debased by decisions made in distant offices by people they will never meet. For a street vendor, a freelancer, a small business owner, simply being able to store value in something that is not melting away can change how they plan their life. It changes how far into the future they are willing to think. When money stops decaying so quickly, time opens up. This is an effect that's difficult to appreciate if you've never lived inside a fragile financial system. In stable economies, saving feels normal. In unstable ones, saving feels naive, even foolish. People learn through hard experience that holding on to money is a losing game. Bitcoin breaks that psychological loop. It doesn't guarantee success, but it restores the logic of saving. It makes patience rational again. Another group of quiet beneficiaries are people excluded from the formal banking system altogether. Not because they're irresponsible or dangerous, but because the system simply wasn't built for them. They might lack documentation. They might live too far from physical branches. They might operate businesses too small or too informal to justify the attention of a bank. For them, opening an account isn't a right. It's a privilege that can be revoked or denied without explanation. Bitcoin doesn't ask questions. It doesn't care where you're from, what your credit history looks like, or whether someone has deemed you bankable. If you can hold a private key, you can hold value. That alone collapses a barrier that has existed for generations. Then there are the people who live under capital controls, sanctions, or sudden policy shifts. One day, moving money across borders is normal. The next, it's illegal. Accounts are frozen. Withdrawals are limited. Trust evaporates overnight. For these people, Bitcoin is not ideological. It's practical. It's the ability to carry value across a border without carrying anything at all. It's the ability to leave a country without leaving your life savings behind. It's financial continuity in a world that has become unpredictable. Critics often dismiss these use cases as niche or exaggerated. But that criticism usually comes from the most privileged vantage point imaginable. A place where banks work, currencies hold value, and financial rules remain relatively stable. Bitcoin's true utility reveals itself most clearly where systems fail. And here's the key insight that rarely gets discussed. For these quiet beneficiaries, the biggest advantage of Bitcoin is not upside, it's downside protection. They are not trying to beat the market. They are trying to avoid being crushed by it. They don't care if Bitcoin doubles this year. They care that their savings won't be worth half as much next year. They don't obsess over volatility charts because volatility, compared to hyperinflation or sudden confiscation, feels manageable. In that context, Bitcoin swings look less like chaos and more like honesty. It goes up and down in the open. There are no closed-door meetings, no surprise announcements, no overnight redefinitions of value. What you see is what you get. This is why framing Bitcoin purely as a speculative asset misses the human dimension entirely. It ignores the fact that for a large portion of its users, Bitcoin is not a bet. It's a shield. And shields don't need to be perfect. They just need to work better than nothing. When you step back, something remarkable becomes clear. Some of the people who benefit the most from Bitcoin may never accumulate large amounts of it. They may never experience dramatic gains, but their relationship with money changes in a fundamental way. They stop being trapped in a system that punishes them for existing. They regain a small but crucial sense of control. And sometimes that is the difference between living reactively and living deliberately. In the next part, we'll shift focus again. Because even among those with access, even among those in stable economies, the greatest benefits of Bitcoin do not go to everyone equally. They go to a very specific type of person, not the richest, but the ones who truly understand what Bitcoin is teaching them. There is a subtle but critical distinction that rarely gets acknowledged in conversations about Bitcoin. Owning Bitcoin is not the same as benefiting from Bitcoin. Millions of people have bought it, sold it, traded it, and talked about it endlessly. And yet, only a fraction of them have experienced the deeper shift that Bitcoin offers. The rest remain emotionally tethered to the very system Bitcoin was meant to challenge. They still think in short time frames. They still react to noise. They still measure success in quarterly returns and temporary price spikes. Bitcoin sits in their portfolio, but it never reaches their mindset. And because of that, its greatest benefits pass right by them. The people who benefit the most from Bitcoin are not defined by how early they bought or how much they hold. They are defined by how completely Bitcoin reshapes the way they think about money, time, and personal responsibility. Understanding Bitcoin forces an uncomfortable confrontation with reality. It exposes how fragile most financial systems actually are. It reveals how deeply inflation distorts incentives. It challenges the idea that money is something neutral, apolitical, or harmless. Once you see these things clearly, it becomes almost impossible to unsee them. And that awareness changes behavior. People who truly understand Bitcoin begin to think in decades, not months. They stop obsessing over daily price movements and start paying attention to long-term trends in energy, technology, and human coordination. They become less reactive, less emotional, and paradoxically, less anxious about the future. Not because the future is guaranteed to be better, but because they have chosen a system that rewards patience over panic. Bitcoin is brutally honest. It doesn't protect you from your own mistakes. It doesn't bail you out for poor decisions. There is no customer support line for lost private keys, no authority you can appeal to if you act recklessly. For many people, this feels terrifying. For others, it's liberating. Responsibility, when accepted fully, has a strange effect. It sharpens attention, it encourages learning, it demands discipline, and over time, it builds confidence that doesn't depend on institutions keeping their promises. This is why so many long-term Bitcoiners sound less like traders and more like philosophers. They talk about incentives, entropy, human nature. They talk about why hard money changes how people treat their future selves. They talk about delayed gratification, not as a virtue, but as a survival strategy. Bitcoin quietly rewards those traits, not with instant wealth, but with stability of mindset. A person who understands Bitcoin deeply often becomes harder to manipulate. They are less susceptible to hype cycles and fear campaigns. They no longer need constant reassurance from authorities or experts. They've learned how to verify rather than trust. This shift spills into other areas of life. Work becomes more intentional. Consumption becomes more deliberate. Time becomes something to protect rather than trade away blindly. The question slowly changes from, how do I make more money, to, what is this money actually for? Ironically, many people who approach Bitcoin purely to escape the rat race end up realizing that the race itself was the problem. Bitcoin doesn't just offer an alternative financial system, it exposes the cost of living inside the old one. That realization can be uncomfortable. It forces people to confront their own habits of excess, impatience, and dependency. It removes convenient excuses. When money is hard, waste becomes visible. When savings hold value, procrastination becomes expensive. Bitcoin doesn't just store value, it stores consequences. This is why speculation alone rarely leads to lasting benefit. A person can get lucky once. They can ride a bull market and feel invincible. But without understanding, that success often dissolves into the next cycle of fear and regret. Bitcoin doesn't reward cleverness as much as it rewards alignment. Alignment between actions and time horizon, between risk and responsibility, between expectations and reality. Those who achieve that alignment tend to experience something more durable than profit. They experience a reduction in financial noise, fewer frantic decisions, less constant second guessing, more mental clarity. And clarity, in a world saturated with distractions, is an underrated form of wealth. This doesn't mean these people are immune to loss or hardship. Bitcoin does not eliminate uncertainty. What it does is remove a layer of artificial uncertainty imposed by constantly shifting monetary rules. When the ground beneath you stops moving arbitrarily, you can finally focus on walking forward. So when we ask who benefits the most from Bitcoin, the answer continues to drift away from balance sheets and towards something harder to measure. The greatest beneficiaries are not the loudest, the richest, or the most aggressive. They are the ones who let Bitcoin change them. And yet, even this is not the end of the story, because the most profound benefits of Bitcoin may not belong to anyone alive today. In the final part, we'll lift our eyes beyond the present moment and ask a bigger question. Who benefits from Bitcoin in the long run? And what kind of world might it quietly be building for those who come after us? If we limit the value of Bitcoin to what it does for us personally right now, we miss its most ambitious implication. Bitcoin was not created to optimize comfort for a single generation. It was created in response to a structural flaw that has repeated itself throughout history. Money that can be manipulated eventually becomes a tool of short-term power, and short-term power rarely thinks about the future. Every generation inherits the consequences of monetary decisions it didn't make. Debt accumulates, purchasing power erodes, incentives skew toward immediacy. The future is quietly sacrificed to preserve the present. This pattern is so normalized that most people don't even question it. They simply adapt, consume, and cope. Bitcoin interrupts that cycle. For the first time, humanity has a monetary system whose rules cannot be altered to solve today's problems at tomorrow's expense. Its supply is fixed. Its issuance is predictable. Its governance is distributed. These are not technical details. They are moral constraints embedded in code, and moral constraints matter most over long periods of time. The greatest beneficiaries of Bitcoin may never buy it, never mine it, never even think about it consciously. They may simply grow up in a world shaped by the standards it sets. A world where money cannot be printed on demand forces different choices. Governments must prioritize. Institutions must justify themselves. Long-term thinking becomes less optional. In such a world, saving is no longer an act of defiance. It's just common sense. When money reliably holds value, people are more willing to defer consumption. They plan further ahead. They invest in skills, relationships, and infrastructure instead of scrambling for short-term hedges against inflation. This is how civilizations are built, not through constant stimulation, but through patience and continuity. Bitcoin, at its core, is a form of financial memory. It remembers how much value exists. It remembers the rules under which that value was created. And it refuses to forget, no matter how politically inconvenient remembering becomes. Throughout history, societies have struggled to preserve memory in their money. Gold tried, but was centralized. Fiat promised flexibility, but delivered amnesia. Bitcoin offers something new, a ledger that cannot be quietly rewritten. That matters profoundly for future generations. It means that when they work, their effort is less likely to be diluted. When they save, their discipline is less likely to be punished. When they plan, the ground beneath them is more stable. This doesn't create utopia. Bitcoin does not eliminate inequality, conflict, or human error, but it removes a powerful accelerant that has magnified those problems for decades. It slows the system down. And slowing down is not a weakness. It's a form of resilience. A slower monetary system discourages reckless leverage. It reduces the incentive to financialize everything. It shifts the cultural narrative away from endless growth at any cost and towards sustainability over time. In that sense, Bitcoin's greatest gift may be cultural rather than financial. It reintroduces the idea that the future matters. When we ask who benefits the most from Bitcoin, the most honest answer might be unsettling. It may not be the early adopters. It may not be the disciplined savers. It may not even be the communities escaping broken systems today. It may be the children of those communities. It may be the people who inherit a world where money is less political, less fragile, and less extractive. A world where trust is rooted in verifiable rules rather than shifting promises. Bitcoin does not guarantee this future. It merely makes it possible. And that distinction is important because possibility invites responsibility. The question then is not whether Bitcoin will benefit the most people. The question is whether enough people will choose to use it in a way that aligns with its long-term nature. Bitcoin doesn't force change. It offers an alternative, a quiet one, patient, uncompromising. In a world obsessed with speed, that patience may be its most radical feature. So who actually benefits the most from Bitcoin? The answer evolves as we widen the lens. First, those who need an exit from broken systems. Then, those who understand and align with its principles. And finally, those who inherit the consequences of a monetary standard that refuses to lie. Bitcoin may never make everyone rich, but it might make the future more honest. And that, in the long run, may be the greatest benefit of all.